Okay, so sorry about that. Got 20 minutes into the original live stream and nothing's really holding together on the tank, and that's because this Mr. Cement is just that, a true cement. They keep it as thin as Tamiya's, but see, the trick with using Tamiya thin is that it's a solvent, so it has instant grab and it melts the plastic together, so you have some room in there where it's always adhesive. This is for instantaneous setting, or it will evaporate. And since I have to take a lot of time to fit these pieces together, I don't have that kind of luxury. So we'll just be using this for now. Kind of unfortunate. I will give it another try and see how well it works on other projects. But for now, just going to be using basic Tamiya cement, and hopefully that goes well. It did kind of create a raised gap. It's not too noticeable. It's a micro gap between the top of the mantle and this, and that's exactly why you don't want to use too much solvent. So now I've completely wrecked the top of this, but once it's dry, that's what sanding is for, and all of that will go away, so not the end of the world. And that's why you want to see where it is. But for me, like I just said, I'd rather actually have my pieces, glued than just have them fall off every 2 seconds. So just some light sanding. Don't really want to ruin the finer details here. And so now that will go away with painting, so that's fine. For the most part, there's the main assembly. Now some pretty small options. Let's cut out J30, which is this really tiny piece. Actually, that's kind of huge. Never mind. It looks small in the instructions. This is one of those times where you might be better off just sanding it down. It does have a pretty crazy seam line down the whole side of this. Attempt to remove that where we can. Obviously, in some of the details, it's kind of difficult to do. If you do Gundam, this would be a sanding step. If you do Warhammer minis, this is basically the beginning to every model. It's just doing this. So no crazy new techniques yet. This is all almost exactly like building any of those kits. Alrighty, so now that we kind of remove the seam line, this goes in the very first circle up here. Also, another reason I like using solvents is because I personally do some sanding work with them, so there's no need for glue to be on that part or on this part, but it will help melt the plastic a little bit and hide those seam line marks or scrapes from the seam line removal and kind of just make the plastic homogeneous. Softens those raised lines and details. Probably help if I had this. So here's F60, another super small piece. Gotta remove. All around, so far with the nippers that I'm using, the Citadel ones instead of my normal sprue cutters, they're nice. They're actually pretty good. So this is a good place to use tweezers. This is going to be placed right in the very top part of the mantle here, or mantlet. However you want to say that. Oops. My tweezers are too grabby. Here we go. You can just make fine point adjustments with your knife. Oh, went too far. You see, this is another thing that I like about Tamiya thin cement instead of using that Mr. Hobby stuff, is that it gives me more than enough time to adjust and readjust to where pieces sit. So there's that. And finally, from the C-sprue, I'm going to need a really tiny piece. If I can find the C-sprue. Actually, I didn't have to cut it open. It's just kind of just takes it together. Easy enough. Attention to detail in this hobby helps. I need to be paying more attention, I guess. So C37 should be something really, really small. Yeah, it's one of these hooks here. So here's where masking tape can come in handy. When you're dealing with pieces that small, you don't want them to go flying off into the ether. You can just stick a piece of masking tape to them. Like that, and you will be less likely to lose them. And so, just like that, your it's not focused, but just like that, your piece is saved. This is a piece I wish I could have sanded on the sprue, but as it has only one locating point on the sprue, it's going to be pretty hard to sand. Again, self-closing tweezers are going to be pretty helpful here. sanding that bird down. In the instructions, it's supposed to go on sideways, and there's 2 of these that go on the turret, I think. That go right here. So it should go on something like that. Way too much glue, but it is what it is. So there's one of the very tiny locating points for lifting the gun off of the vehicle. Should that be necessary to do at any point in maintenance. Now I gotta find 37 again. So there's some flash on these pieces, even though they're super tiny, that makes it so hard to deal with. But that's another reason why I like solvents instead of cements, is that, like I was doing earlier, solvents will actually melt any dust or debris if given enough time to do so, which is nice. Move that bird fairly easily. Try to get less solvent where I need it this time around. So like that extra flash is on the tip there. We're just gonna put that under some solvent, let it melt away, and there we have our 2 points. Right there. Very tiny pieces indeed. Now you can move on finally to the main barrel assembly, starting with F15 and F16. These 2 huge parts at the rear of the cannon that make up, or would make up, the breech and auto loading system for the M1A2's 120mm gun. Now, of course, this really isn't going to be seen even when you open the turret, the hatches. If you have figures, they're going to cover most of this, but it is nice to have some kind of vague shape in the turret that catches the eye and at least lets people know that there's something in there, like in a real tank. huge. So clean up on these. Again, knife and then knife again. Just like the other ones. Try to remove as much as the thickest parts of the burr as you can, and then be real gentle with the rest of it, because you don't want to start cutting gouges out, especially in these awkward shapes and angles. You don't want to cut gouges out of your barrel. Lucky for me, all this, well, most of this is going to be concealed, so I'm not too worried about this particular part right now, but I have a feeling that the rest of the barrel is going to be the same way. Really thick connecting points. And you can just lightly sand down what's left of the burrs. Nothing too crazy drastic. Like I said, with the coaxial mount, we're not trying to reshape, just trying to sand. Although that does tend to happen a lot on accident, is you will reshape some parts. It's okay. Practice makes perfect, and I've been out of practice for a while when it comes to stuff like this. Like the last 35th scale kit I built was actually a M151, which was Ford's replacement for the standard Army Jeep in Vietnam and other fields of operation until the Humvee was chosen to take up the mantle, so there was no gun barrels on it whatsoever. So there we go. Oh, I forgot. Yeah, also what I should have done is, it's better, and I'll be doing this with the barrel if I have to, it's always better to do rounded objects, sand them and stuff after they're glued together. Honestly, what I should have done. Just because it's easier to keep a consistent, especially if you want to keep the shape and keep the edges rounded in a very specific way that would be realistic. It's just easier. You don't have to do it by any means. I mean, I didn't do it just now, but it certainly helps. Just normalize everything across the board. So we're gonna let that solvent set for a little bit. When we prepare the main carriage system for the gun and attaching the mantle to all of these parts and then the barrel itself, and we'll be done. At least with this subassembly. This is actually a way more involved process than I thought it would be. So this live, I originally planned on just building a couple of tracks, showing it off, and then stopping. So thank you for whoever is, stayed. But this is just going to be the gun. Again, I primarily use my knife. And just like with Warhammers, this is more for the Warhammer guys. This will be more familiar for them than Gundam guys. Is scraping. Scraping of seam lines, cutting and cleaning of flash. That sort of thing. As you know, there is a lot of that with Game Workshop's minis. So, should be fine. Just trying to sand down parts of the seam lines here where we can. Again, I'm not worried too much about focusing this area in particular, just because it won't be visible. Now, obviously, what I'm doing is important for high visibility areas or anything that's basically external. Any external part that you're going to be able to see with the naked eye, you're going to want to do this for. But since you can't do that with these, we're just going to move on for now, just basic cleanup. Okay, got it. So this should just, yeah, almost click into place there. This is a tough bit. I'm assuming this is to make the gun barrel able to elevate and depress. But there's that. Next is F55. I can already see on the gas equalizer part, which we'll be getting to here, has a pretty nasty seam line in it, which is unfortunate, but not impossible to remove or at least hide in painting. So there's not too many places where seam lines can ruin an armor kit. This isn't like building aircraft, which is what I'm fond of about it. However, there are some key areas you don't want to see seam lines because they're going to be, one, hard to remove, and two, highly visible. And one of those would be, of course, the gun barrel. It's kind of unfortunate that we have one. Okay, so that has a locating pin in the top of it and should slot right into place. And then this slides over the entire thing. I can get it to work. Ooh, that is a really tight fit. That is super tight. Oh wow. Okay. It's not gonna make it over. Okay, yeah, so see this coaxial, by the way, is still not even really set into the part, so I would not recommend using that black glue for beginners. Although you might, if you're used to it, just use it. I am not used to it, so I'm going to need some more practice with that glue. For sure. But now that that bit's done, here's everything so far. then right the breech, attach in. That way it only goes in one way, so again, that's nice. It's always nice to have locating pins like that. There should be a part of the barrel that goes right there, right next to that. But I'm not seeing it yet, at least under the instructions. Should be at least be some piece here that is filled in. So I have to go back and see if I missed anything there. So you really don't want to be looking up in there when the kit's completed. So far, so good. Now comes the main barrel. F71, F23, F29. Oops. F26, F26, and then F9. I already used F29. I was so confused for a second. Again, attention to detail is super important in this hobby. Maybe I should remind myself of that more often. So F9 looks like it's a really small piece. If I can find it, yes, it is a really small piece, a really delicate piece that needs some cleanup. So for pieces like this, I'm going to try and just trim it ever so slightly while it's still on the sprue here. Let's get a pretty gruesome layer of flash. We'll get to that later. For now, let's focus on cleaning up this barrel. So again, super cool that they drilled in those release holes for us. That was cool. But yeah, huge locating points all over the barrel. Not something you really want to look at. Fortunate. Same thing, so all of this here is, even though it's molded as one piece, which is really nice, they just took two halves of plastic when they made the mold, and that creates the same kind of terrible seam you would have if you had just gotten two pieces and glued it together. Although it is less work, I suppose, so not totally terrible. And then of course some flash. Again, back to, and I don't know how many people do this in Gundam. I do it for mine, but that's because of Warhammer. So I'm going to keep saying Warhammer, guys. But, I mean, if you use this in Gundam, let me know. Just scrape the panel line softly. It's not too big of a deal. Light sanding, nothing really terrible needs to happen. And then some solvent over that will just make that seam line disappear. It's a little bit harder on the bottom there. But again, same thing, light scraping, light sanding. Just the point is to be as gentle as possible with these pieces. As they are rounded, it is easy to deform them, which is not really something you want to do. So I gotta say, out of all the nice details that I'm talking about with this kit, it's kind of unfortunate to have a multi-piece barrel like this, and I was really nervous, so I'm excited to be doing it and just seeing how it is. It's not the best, and so if anybody's gonna build this in the future, I do what I would originally planned on doing, and just buy a metal barrel. It's honestly probably the weakest point of the kit, and that's saying a lot as it's still a highly detailed barrel. I mean, it's just absolutely crazy gorgeous. So just like with the rear or the breech section, everything slides up and over and to the forward position. Trying hard not to get solvent everywhere, but you'll see I'm placing it just on top of those seam lines again. It'll help melt those down, and when you paint it, they will be completely invisible and finally completely removed. Some part on here. There you go. There's a lot of flash inside the barrel. Again, that's not a problem because it doesn't really do much. It's better to have it inside than outside. Allows this to slip in one single way. If I could just get it to sit properly. This is the basic main barrel. Then get to F9, which is actually the laser sight for the vehicle. Super tiny piece and super delicate. I already tried cleaning it up on the sprue, so hopefully there won't be too much work I gotta do to complete it. And this would be a piece where it's the opposite of circular pieces, where you want to cut as close as possible, just so that way when you get it off the sprue, there's as little cleanup as possible. Otherwise, it's just going to be really, really hard. It's the same thing that you saw with the lift handles for the forward mantlet. Just hard to work with. So that will go and lay right on top of the barrel. Which it's not sitting flush. So what you do in that kind of situation is I'm just going to remove the locating pins, since we know which way it's going to be facing, and just glue it straight down. Alternatively, I could have done, or you could do it, whatever is easier for you. You could have drilled out the a little deeper recess where the locating pins were and sat it in there comfortably. I just don't want to risk drilling through the barrel, and so I'm not going that route. If you're better at drilling than I am, that's probably the way you want to go. So it's always nice to have some sense of direction. So there's the main barrel. Finally, all of that will attach to F70 and complete the assembly. Which, of course, another piece that has huge locating points. So this is not something I was aware of with ride-fueled kits, and it's not just them, I'm sure. It's just been a long time since I've done it, so this could be honestly a new 35th scale standard, but the locating points for these barrels, at least with this kit, is they're just crazy thick, which is unfortunate, but again, not terrible. It hasn't broken the project yet. But I would recommend, if you don't want to spend this much time just putting together a barrel that's itself 6 pieces into an assembly that's already 20 pieces deep, just buy a metal barrel. This slides in that way. This will slide back over onto this. It's going to take some more solvent to help melt some of that stuff, and it's going to take a lot of sanding. A lot of fine grit sanding. So I didn't bring any fine grit paper with me for this, because again, I thought I was starting with the tracks. I should have looked. But you're going to work your way up from about an 800 grit is where I would start, and then go all the way up to 1200, 1600. Probably not. You probably won't need to go to 1600. That's overkill. But a lot of glue. Just to help make sure this thing is completely straight, which, yeah, it looks pretty good so far. Having a multi-piece barrel like this is not great, because if I'm trying to, as I'm trying to adjust it this way, the whole barrel doesn't move, and that's kind of a problem. So yeah, you're gonna do a lot of fine sanding before you see this next. But thank you guys so much for watching. That's gonna pretty much be it for this live stream. A lot of work, and then sometime tomorrow I will be covering just the turret itself, which is already looking like it's going to be a crazy massive part of this project. So thanks for joining me, and for anybody who didn't catch it, I will be uploading it to YouTube shortly, so hopefully you'll catch it there. As always, thanks for the support, and I'm hoping a lot more guys are getting interested in armor building, because as complicated or as tedious as it seems, it's really quite a fun hobby.